So good afternoon and good morning for those who are following us from France, and welcome to our webinar about the SME working groups, about the financial tools and policies for SMEs facing the COVID-19. So today we have with us Christine Mill from a DHH law firm who will talk to us about the China support policies for SMEs, and Thomas Grangeard from Mazar, who will explain us how to finance your operations and the cash management in a crisis. I would like to remind you that we have a chat function, so do not hesitate to ask questions, and we will try to answer them all at the end of this webinar. Thank you, and I will give the microphone to Christine.
Thank you, Walter. I hope everybody can hear me correctly. Welcome to this SME Working Group, which is under special circumstances today, as we are not allowed to physically meet. We hope that all your family and your close parents and you yourself are in good health, and that we will be able to resume shortly our physical meetings. On the other end, the positive thing is that usually our SME working group does not gather so many people. I think we have 50 people today on the webinar together with us. So it's a great moment to gather and exchange and share the questions and the issues that we may have. We know that some SMEs are particularly suffering in this crisis, and this session really has the purpose to give you some tools and indications of what support you could seek, what measures you could put in place to ease the burden on your company and be ready to restart your activity in the best conditions possible as soon as the different measures restricting activities will be relaxed. So I hope we will be able to give you this insight today. So as Walter mentioned, the topic today is financial tools and policies for SMEs facing COVID-19. The session will be organized as follows. I will start on the Chinese policies for SMEs during 20 minutes. Then Thomas Grangeard, who is together with us on the webinar, Thomas Grangeard from Mazar, will tell you how to manage cash in a situation of crisis, and then we will have time for exchanges and the questions and answer session. So we can start the first topic. So we can see the PPT. So yeah, I took the liberty to put my WeChat QR code on the right. You can scan it, and as we cannot exchange business card today, you can scan it and use it to exchange with me later. Just a few words about myself and my law firm. I'm working, it's been 15 years, I'm a lawyer. I'm a French qualified lawyer, and I'm working in a Chinese law firm, DHH law firm, which is a Chinese law firm which headquartered in Beijing, but we have offices in more than 50 cities in China and overseas, and more than 2,000 lawyers, mainly Chinese, working in this law firm. And I mentioned the 15 offices in China because you will see in the following presentation regarding the Chinese policies for SMEs that many of these policies have been issued by a local government. And then it's important to have support locally to engage into discussion with these governments. And this law firm, DHH, is providing legal advice in all legal practices for businesses and almost all industries. So firstly, I will talk about the challenges faced by companies in the COVID-19 crisis very, very quickly, and then we will go on to talk about the support from Chinese authorities to SMEs. Regarding the challenges faced by companies in this crisis, there has been different surveys conducted by many chambers of commerce, including the French Chamber of Commerce. You probably saw the result of the survey on CCIFC website. The European Chamber has also conducted a survey, and one of the questions they asked was, in this crisis, did this crisis have an impact on your business? And the answer of 59% of companies surveyed, which are not only SMEs, it's companies members of the UCC. The answer of 59% was high impact and 29% was medium impact. So overall, 90% of them said that their business was quite significantly impacted by the crisis. Then another question asked was, please specify how your business in China has been affected by the novel coronavirus outbreak. So for 54%, there was a decrease in demand for products and services. It was the main and the biggest problem. Then followed shortly by staff shortages. Then the uncertainty and inability to make business and investment decisions. Then came the inability to meet the contractual delivery deadlines due to disruption of logistics, as well as manufacturing delays. So logistics and manufacturing delays were on the same problem, and of course the same level. And of course, the consequence of all these operational difficulties was the cash flow challenges and the cost of HR compliance. A survey has been carried out by the China Center for Promotion of SME Development, and they identified the following difficulties for SMEs this time. It was really a survey conducted regarding SMEs. So their difficulty were in fulfilling orders, the first one. Second one, pressure due to the general cost. Third, the tight budget and financial difficulties. Fourth, the difficulty in collecting sales and service payment. And fifth, the client lost. And finally, the UCC asked its members what kind of support measures they would like to see introduced by the Chinese government to help them deal with their difficulties. The answers from the main part of the companies was to get financial support to reduce operational costs, then to get some tax reductions, then to have the release of transportation and commuting restrictions, of course, to have unified regulations to resume business, as we see that really these regulations are completely different from a province to a city to a district and even to a building. So it's quite difficult for companies to cope with all these different rules, which are not always consistent. And then finally, the provision of health protection equipment and some more transparent communication from authorities. So yeah, that's something which allows us to see what are the difficulties of companies and SMEs, in which field are these difficulties, and what they weight from the Chinese government to help them ease these difficulties. So let's go to see what support the Chinese authorities have already put in place for SMEs in this crisis. Just to put things in perspective, to remind you that China has confirmed that it will maintain its target of GDP for 2020 at 5.5%. It was already its target before the crisis, and it has confirmed that it will maintain this target despite the crisis. And so for doing this, it has to increase its support to sustain the economy. And the support to SMEs is one of the key concerns of Chinese government in this crisis. And in addition to that, China is placing also great importance on restoring confidence of foreign business community. So Chinese authorities and their speakers have repeatedly, in various occasions, confirmed that the proposed measures for SMEs will benefit not only to Chinese SMEs, but also to foreign invested SMEs. Many of these measures are taxation measures. So as far as you pay your taxes in China, you should be able to enjoy these policies. Also, maybe you recall the foreign investment law, which entered in force on the 1st of Jan of this year, and it affirms the equality of treatment of foreign invested enterprises and local companies. So normally, all these measures I'm going to talk about can be enjoyed by Chinese SMEs, but also by foreign invested SMEs. Regarding what is an SME under Chinese law, and then what specific measures you can enjoy as an SME, you can refer to a classification from the MIIT, which is dated 2011, which is classifying the SMEs into different categories, medium, small, and mini enterprises, depending on different criteria linked to their revenue and the number of employees. And this classification gives different criteria and classification depending on the industry. So the criteria and classification vary according to these different industries. So if you have a question regarding your industry, don't hesitate to come back to me and we can discuss about it. China has issued numerous measures to support companies during the COVID-19 crisis at different levels, at the national level and the local level, for all companies as well as specifically for SMEs, and in the following fields that is listed in front of you: resumption of work and production, taxation, financing, customs, imports and exports, support to FIEs, foreign invested enterprises, support to SMEs, social security, energy costs reduction, intellectual property rights services, and public legal services. So there are many measures, and in the presentation after, you will see that it summarizes and highlights the measures which are applicable specifically to SMEs, but it cannot be exhaustive. And SMEs need to check both the measures which are specific to SMEs and to check also the measures which apply to all companies. So as I mentioned, there are some national policies as well as local policies. National policies have nationwide applications and they state more general principles. They have been issued by the State Council, the Ministry of Finance, the People's Bank Republic of China, the NDRC, the MOFCOM, the MIIT, and CBIRC. And there have been at the national levels about 20 measures for SMEs. And on the other side, you have local policies, which then have local application and which are far more detailed. For SMEs, you can see in front of you the list of local governments or cities which have issued the measures. And there have been more than 200 measures for SMEs issued by more than 10 local provinces or cities. So to give you examples of national policies, which again it is non-exhaustive given the number of measures that have been issued, there have been some policies regarding taxation. One of them is the delayed tax recollection. SMEs which have difficulties to file tax returns due to the situation may extend their tax payments for a maximum of 3 months. Another topic is the temporary reduction or exemption of real estate tax and urban land use tax. If again some companies are affected by the epidemic and have experienced interrupt production or suffered heavy losses during this time, they may apply for a temporary reduction or even an exemption. You also have the possibility to deduct the charitable donations that you could have done. And regarding VAT, for small taxpayers, which VAT rate is set as at 3%, there will be a total exemption of VAT for taxpayers for small taxpayers from Hubei province from the 1st of March until the end of May. And in other regions, they will pay a lower tax rate at 1%. Other examples of national policies in the field of financing this time. The CBIRC allows the SMEs to make application with their banks to defer repayment of principal and interest expenses payable from January 25 to June 30. And the overdue loan repayments which might be due during this period of time will not be subject to penalties. And falling also under the category of financing is the trim of electricity charges by 5% for companies which are not in the high energy consuming industries. On the side of social security measures, there is a reduction on the postponement of social security contributions for corporate employees. and also the registration for participating in the social insurance plans can be postponed after the end of the epidemic. So besides the national policies for SMEs, I gave you some examples of local policies for SMEs. Again, the number of measures is huge, and we cannot give you the exact list here, but depending on the location of your company, on your industry, and if you qualify or not with the criteria of SMEs, do not hesitate to ask me some question or to contact me directly to see if you could enjoy some specific policies. So some examples of local policies have been allowing deferred tax payment for SMEs in difficulty, extending the payment period of social insurance premiums, reducing rents for SMEs, especially SMEs which have a lease with state-owned lessors. They can enjoy a reduction of their rental fee, the waiving of some administrative fees, the subsidy of research and development cost, some increase in some financial supports, the refund of unemployment insurance premiums, offering social insurance subsidies as well. And there have been also some subsidies proposed for employee training and the purchasing of teleworking service products. Right, so as a conclusion and maybe more practical advice on the way to go ask for this kind of incentives. So as you could see, the practical applicable measures are at the level of the local governments. So you need to follow up very closely what measures have been issued by the localities where your company is located. As the implementation can be unclear in some cities, you need to negotiate locally with these authorities. There could be a possibility that banks offer discount rates or local governments offer subsidies. So you need to enter into a dialogue with the banks or local authorities. And in terms of timing, you need to be careful because these measures are temporary. They could end quickly when the crisis will end. So you need to really analyze and take steps to negotiate these incentives before end March. So in total, keep an eye on the policies, consult with the local government departments, with the local banks in a timely manner, and to see how you can ease the financial burden on your company and restart your activity in a better position when the crisis will ease a little bit. And a last word, because apart from these policies, as I mentioned, our concern here is that this crisis is quite difficult to bear for SMEs, and you need to pay attention not only to these incentives, but also to other measures that you could take in other fields to make sure that you protect your company and monitor your obligation on other topics. So here I gave some examples. Pay attention to your contractual obligations, your contracts with your suppliers, clients, see if there is a force majeure clause or hardship clause, and if not, nevertheless, under some jurisdiction, you can trigger these tools to at least start to negotiate with your counterpart and see how to release the obligation on your company. Pay attention, of course, to employment matters, because this situation triggers a lot of issues in this field. For example, the payment of salaries, the reduction of activity, the hygiene and safety measures for employees, and various obligations which have been requested by authorities for monitoring employees' health and travel, etc. And these employment matters themselves also trigger some data privacy issues, because employers have to collect data regarding, as I mentioned, health, travel history of the employees, and at the same time, it's an obligation on you, requested by the authorities. But on the other side, you still have to pay attention to data privacy issues and regulations in this field. Okay, that's all for this topic for the moment. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Thomas Grangeard from Mazars.
Thank you very much, Christine, for all those precious information. Do not hesitate, as I mentioned, to ask your questions in the chat. We will reply them after Thomas' presentation. Thomas, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, I invite you to share your screen and introduce yourself a bit. So you're from Mazars, right?
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, I'll start by introducing myself very quickly. So I'm Thomas. I've been in Beijing since so Mazars, for those of you who don't know, is an international accounting and auditing firm present in China since 1997. Today, we have about 4,000 staff in China, spread across 30 offices located all across China. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's good. We can see your screen.
Okay, great, fantastic. So for the second part of this webinar, I wanted to talk about one of the most practical repercussions of a crisis on businesses, which was also highlighted by the CCIFC study, cash. Because however your business is being impacted by the crisis, whether it is directly affecting you, your activity and your cash-ins, or whether you are indirectly impacted because your customers are themselves affected and so slower to pay you. Cash management is of the utmost importance. So first, I will talk about reporting, what numbers to look out for and how to interpret them. Then, once the situation of your business is understood, how to manage cash to get through this difficult time. Finally, if your analysis were to conclude that, well, there's a need for financing, then we'll talk about what your options are in China. So first, obviously, you need to understand how your business is being affected. You are managing your business, so you probably already have a good idea. But in times of crisis, your energy may be focusing on what seems to be the most urgent of problems and not necessarily on getting the big picture. So remember to take a step back and get an overview of your business situation. It may reveal other problems that have yet to come under your radar, or even show a trend that may lead you to divert your energy on entirely different matters. So for your analysis, you'll need obviously the support of your accountant. Ask for the financial statements. They summarize the performance of your company. There are three core financial statements. I'm sure everyone is aware of the balance sheet, which reports a company's assets, liabilities, and equity. In it, you'll find very quickly the balances of cash, receivables, and payables at a fixed date. So remember, the balance sheet shows an image taken an instant. So for instance, it's still a little early in the month, but you might be getting soon your financial statements as of end of February 2020. So remember that when you're looking at the balance sheet, it is an image taken on 29 of February 2020. Nevertheless, you'll get a good general feel of where your company stands in terms of liquidity. The second of the financial statements is the income statement, which presents the company's profits and losses. In it, you will find your sales, cost of sales, expenses over a period of time. So here, differently from the balance sheet, it's not an image, it shows a movie. It will show you the performance over a certain period of time. So for instance, again, when you receive your February accounts, most likely the income statement will show the performance from January 1st to February 29th. You'll get a general feel of what your company's performance has been during that time. Though all managers are familiar with the income statements, some may at times be feeling at odds with the results presented. And that's because accounts are prepared on an accrual basis rather than on a cash basis. Another point to remember is that financial statements come in three, and they come in three for a reason. Taken separately, they may tell you a different story than if you're looking at them all at the same time. For instance, your company's activity may not be affected by the crisis, meaning you still have the same amount of work that you were expecting before the crisis. Your income statement would show expected results on the income line and cost lines. But if the crisis is affecting your clients, who are in turn delaying payments, your income statement will show good results, but your balance sheet will present larger amounts of receivables than usual and lesser cash. If that's the case, then your business is starting to be affected by the crisis. So remember, take a good look at all your financial statements. Don't put all of your focus on one. The last of the financial statements is the cash flow statement, which presents streams of cash inflows and outflows. There are essentially three main streams of cash movements presented there: operations, investing, and financing. These financial statements are what your company is reporting to government agencies, the Tax Bureau, the Statistics Bureau, Finance Bureau, and so on, but also shareholders and major creditors like banks. So it is important for you to be familiar with the numbers, because when you talk to these people, you want to make sure you're talking about the same thing. Because financial statements were built in one format, fit for all businesses, many companies implement additional reports for internal uses, what I call management reports. These reports are different from business to business. They are meant to be used by management for in-depth analysis and decision-making. Depending on the management reports that your business has implemented, you may also want to take a look at these to further your understanding of the situation. Perhaps part of your business are affected more than others, and that's what the management reports tell you. Beside all of these, you'll definitely be needing your bank and cash journals. They precisely present your cash position at a point of time, much like bank statements. They also show the cash ins and outs. There will be journals for each of your business bank accounts. This will give you an idea of where the cash is sitting and in which currency. This is also important to know, especially in China, because there are specific rules applying to certain types of accounts, like the capital accounts and loan accounts, which see certain specific rules and restrictions on usage of cash. Besides your cash position, you also need to understand what others owe you and what you owe to others. So reports on receivables and payables will help you with that. The balance sheet will give you a good overview, but these reports will provide the added details by breaking these accounts down. Be sure to obtain an aging analysis, which basically tell you how long these receivables and payables have been owed and due. Because payment terms can be different from one transaction to another, maybe a client asks for some longer terms than you usually propose, ask your accountant to add to that a payment term analysis. This will tell you for each of your receivables and payables when precisely it is owed and due. Of course, understanding the current position is important, and analyzing trends can also be a useful tool in understanding the situation. To achieve this, simply study movements over several periods. Is the cash position improving or deteriorating? Are receivables increasing, decreasing, or being stable? Same for the payables. At the end of the day, you really want to have answers to these simple questions. What impact or impacts is this crisis having on my company? Aside from cash, are any other areas like activity being affected? Has this crisis been slow in the making, or has it brutally erupted? Once you understood the situation, the time has come to take action. But while we're talking about reports, do not forget to update your forecasts. The cash forecasts, which will be essential to navigating throughout the crisis, and of course your budget. Compare actual results with forecasts and, if needed, revise the budget. This is important not only for you to plan for the future, but also because your shareholders and creditors, who you might end up talking to at one point of time in the crisis, may ask for that. So you see on the side here a very simple template of presenting this. So on the far left side, you have key accounts constituting an income statement. And then we have basically divided the budget for the year in quarters. So what we see here are Q1 and Q2. A column is presenting actual numbers. So that's columns D and G. Taken from the accounts, and another presenting the original ambitions. So that's columns C and F that were put up when we set up the budget. So these simple tables will help you monitor the effects of the crisis on your activity. A side note here, obviously do not wait for a crisis to get a few things done. The first is probably putting in place a good finance team who will be able to get the work done, of course, but who will also be able to analyze the results of the reports they produce. And, of course, if needed, blow the whistle early enough for you to react. The second key reminder is implement a reliable reporting. Define the KPIs and the metrics that are relevant to your business, and make sure your finance team is implementing them. The last tip would be to meet with your finance team regularly. Don't wait for a crisis to be around to meet with them. They probably have a lot of questions for you, and you probably have a lot of questions for them. So best is to get these out of the way and not wait for a critical moment to be here. Now that we know where to look for numbers, I'm going to give you a few very, very simple metrics that will help you manage cash. The first one, hopefully everyone's heard of it, is the working capital. It's calculated by subtracting current liabilities. So essentially your payables to vendors, employees, government, taxes, social contributions, from current assets. So current assets are cash, receivables, and inventory. What you're looking for here is a result above zero, which would mean that your current assets, so the most liquid assets, when we say liquid assets, that's the ones that are going to be converted into cash the soonest, are sufficient to bear your current liabilities, the ones that need to be paid soon. The second metric is basically the same as the working capital. The only difference is that it's a ratio. What you're looking for here is a ratio equal or greater than 1.0. The third metric is the most conservative test because it removes the inventory from the equation. So why is this being done here? It's basically because many consider that inventory is the least liquid of current assets, meaning that it will take longer to convert into cash. So it will take longer to convert inventory, which is essentially raw materials, work in progress, finished goods, into cash. So we remove inventory from the equation, and what we're hoping to get here is a ratio equal or greater than 1.1. Now, how do we interpret those results? Well, if results from the above test are positive, meaning that your current assets seem to be sufficient to cover your current liabilities, you are not, at least for the time being, under threats of insolvency. That being said, if cash is low, you still need to trade carefully. So the recommendation here is obviously to work on recovering receivables. The aging analysis and payment terms analysis that we mentioned earlier will help you here identify debtors on which you need to concentrate efforts. You know your clients better than anyone, so put a strategy in place that will ensure maximum recoverability and fastest results. Simultaneously, you'll need to schedule settlement of payables. You will need to give priority to some payments rather than others. Here again, you are better positioned than anyone else to statute on this. Use the payables report your accountant is preparing to help you. If results from the above test are negative, then your business is facing the risk of defaulting. This means your business may not be able to pay its debt in full. In accounting terms, we call this a going concern issue. In the common tongue, we say you're at risk of bankruptcy. So we'll address in section 3 financing options that you may consider when facing this situation. But before we move to that section, I wanted to spend a few minutes on cash forecasts. And it's going to be a central report to your cash management. Now, in a normal context, we usually recommend SMEs in China to have a 6-month visibility at a minimum on their cash position. The reason is if you anticipate a need for financing, this is the time you may need to secure it and actually receive funds on your account. In the context of a crisis, of course, you'll need to shorten that visibility and update the forecast regularly, while still keeping an eye out for the mid-long term. So I summarize here the main differences between a short-term forecast and a long-term forecast. In essence, a short-term forecast is meant to estimate cash requirements, plan for short-term financing, scheduling payments, and planning purchases. It's a good tool to get a picture of expected cash flows, and well, it's essential to day-to-day management. On the other hand, long-term forecasting helps you plan for long-term finances, assess the availability of investable surplus, planning capital expenditures, and if needed, raising of funding. It's a must-have when discussing financing with shareholders and creditors. It's also useful for you to plan for the future. These two forecasts, it's important to understand that they are complementary. They give one vision of your business future, one for the short term and another for the long term. So I've added another side note here. So again, don't wait for a crisis to prepare a realistic and realizable cash forecast. Implement the internal controls that will ensure you get early warnings if risk of a crisis on the rise. And of course, implement solid processes on key cycles like invoicing and collection. So financing solutions. So financing in China does not differ much from what you would see in other countries, but in many ways, it's rendered more complex to implement for FIEs because of the foreign exchange controls. The most commonly used solutions are raising capital, contracting a shareholder loan, contracting a bank loan, and charging to your shareholder or any other group company services you're rendering. Each of these solutions offer advantages and disadvantages, which will need to be carefully weighed in before implementation. So raising capital and shareholder loans are undoubtedly the first ones that come to mind because they do not involve third parties. You're simply talking to your shareholder who you probably know very well and meet regularly. So in both cases, you're asking funding from your shareholder. In terms of time of implementation, these solutions are more or less the same. You will need to wait 2 to 3 months generally to see the funds ready to use on your bank account. From your perspective, there may not be much difference between the two, but be mindful of the following. First, limitations on the shareholder loan. The amount you can contract is not unlimited. In fact, the maximum you can contract should be one of the few things you always have in mind. It can be calculated in 2 ways. You can choose freely from either one. First, the simplest one, the borrowing gap. It's simply calculated by subtracting the registered capital from the total investment. You may not remember what the total investment is because it was set up at the moment of incorporation of the company. So look it for in the Articles of Association. That's where both the registered capital and the total investment are defined. So for instance, if your total investment is 5 million RMB and your registered capital is 4 million, then your loan cap is 1 million. The second method of calculating your loan capacity is the microprudential financing system. It's a much more complex risk-weighted approach involving 2 concepts, the cap and the balance. You need to calculate both and make sure that the balance does not exceed the cap. The second thing you need to remember is that you need to be mindful of perception. While an increase of capital and a shareholder loan seems to be the same thing for you, from your shareholder's perspective, it's quite different. Raising capital is a commitment, a long-term commitment, because funds are then immobilized in the company. A loan, on the other hand, implies a repayment in the midterm. And the final thing you should remember when discussing these with your shareholder, which should not be a primary focus, but should still be in the back of your head, is that the shareholder loan obviously generates taxation and interest. Another side note here while we're on this, so the administrative formalities required to raise capital or contract a shareholder loan can be time-consuming and quite cumbersome if mishandled. Assign this project to someone familiar with these formalities because time is pretty much of the essence of these kind of situations, so don't waste time. The other options you have to finance your operations are a loan from the bank in China. You could do that with any foreign bank or domestic bank. Here, because the transaction is domestic, you do not need to worry with limitations, like for the shareholder loan, or with administrative formalities, like increasing the capital or shareholder loan. The difficulty here lies in finding a bank accepting to lend you funds, which for SMEs may be complicated because, well, the banks do not necessarily know you. So be smart here. Go first to the bank your company is working with, or the bank your headquarters are working with, if they have a branch in China. The second difficulty would be negotiated for good conditions. The focus here is on interest and, more importantly, on guarantees. The last option I wanted to talk about is not a financing solutions per se, really, but I want to talk about it because We see this very often being done by companies without really knowing the risk they're taking. So it started with a simple reminder. A shareholder cannot simply transfer money to its Chinese subsidiary because it needs it. Foreign exchange authorities accept only raising capital or limited loan. If your shareholder is sending you funds outside of the scope, then or is paying your vendors directly on your behalf, then you are setting the stage for what will become difficulties in the future. Accounting and tax problems, and most importantly, well, the subsidiary won't be able to repay the shareholder. So avoid doing this. That being said, all this does not mean you cannot invoice services you're rendering to your shareholder. Say, for instance, your shareholder is selling products or projects in China directly without going through you, but still request your help here and there for translation, for key meetings to negotiate. Perhaps you have decided not to charge for those before because you thought it was minor and you were happy to do it. But now that this cash situation is more complex, then you might want to actually charge for these. Again, there needs to be actual substance to the transaction. In other words, there needs to be an actual service being rendered. But if that's the case, then have a contract drafted and invoice your services to your shareholder. And that's it for this part of the presentation. So I know we have a Q&A, but before we move to that, I just wanted to show here my contact information. If you have any questions or any issues you want to talk to a bit more specifically, I'm happy to help. So I think we were supposed to have a Q&A now.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas, for this presentation. I would like also to remind everybody that the PPT and the replay of the working group will be available on our website, www.ccifc.org. We already have a couple of questions. So the first one is for you, Christine. It's about the rent. For rental reduction with SOE landlord, it seems that people did not get invoice or confirmation for February, but no official confirmation that rent will be waived. Did someone got some official documents and how to have proofs of this fee being waived?
Yeah, so far, according to my experience, SOEs landlords are a bit slow to relieve this kind of document, but you are right, it's necessary for you to get this confirmation, so just need to keep asking. I don't know if in the audience, some people already got a confirmation from their state-owned landlord, but I know from my clients' experience that they are quite slow at releasing this kind of document.
And I see someone received a bill for full February and March. Is there a solution for them? Is it?
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's all, and as you know from your experience as well, working in China and having a business in China, you need to go contact the local authorities or your local contact to discuss with them, to show them the regulation, to show them that you think that you can enjoy this kind of policies, and sometimes you need to really negotiate with them. So it's not surprising that many of the SOEs or state-owned landlord or even authorities that you will have facing you will first try not to grant you this benefits, but you need to also write down, send a letter and documents which justify that you think you can enjoy these policies.
Okay. Thank you, Christine, for your answer. We have a very technical question about the postponing of housing fund payment to ease cash flow for company. I think it's for you, Thomas. Did someone has experience already to do extension to end of June as per law, as well as is it possible to do it only for the employees who do not have house loan?
Sorry, unmuting. I think it's true that there are some incentives surrounding the payment of social contribution, certain funds of the social contribution and housing fund. What I've seen, but perhaps Christine, you're better versed in this than me, is that there's a 5 months delay for the payment of housing fund. But implementation rules seem to be hard to come because when we have been asking the administration, so specifically the Housing Fund Center and the Social Contribution Center, as well as these service providers like FESCO and CIC, which are usually quite well informed about these, we have not been getting an answer for this time about how this will be implemented. But it seems that it will be implemented for a 5-month period.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. Another question about financing. In 2003, some banks were doing as overdraft facilitation and inventory against cash offer. Basically, for a trading or production company, you could put your stock as a guarantee and the bank would give you 60% of the value of your stock. Did someone got this possibility? Is it possible this time as well? Is it something the banks set up?
Well, this sounds like the bank's decision. So why not? Maybe, maybe some banks are willing to do that. It's not a general rule. So it really depends on it's a bank-to-bank discussion you need to have to understand what they're willing to offer.
Okay. And what about RMB receivable financing? Is it readily available in Chinese banks?
Yes, I think it is. I think this is something that is still available. Yeah.
Okay. So the best option right now is to go and ask banks about those details, right?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, in China, banking regulations and foreign exchange control change very regularly. So it's important to know what they are at the moment you really need them. So the first thing probably to do is to contact your bank and see what are your options. But typically when you're talking to a Chinese bank, at the very least, you don't have foreign exchange control issues. So you can talk directly about the conditions they are willing to offer you on specific financing tools.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. I have another question for Christine. What's the standard of SME in Tianjin, the size, the revenue?
The classification doesn't depend on the location, but on the industry. So it depends on the industry in which your company is having its activity. And then depending on the industry and either on the revenue of your companies or on the number of employees of your company, it will determine if you are an SME or not.
Okay. Please, if you have questions, we still have a bit of time and we will answer them with pleasure. Meanwhile, I would like also to thank our speakers and the coordinator. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Thomas, for bringing your insight during this crisis period to all our CCI members. And of course, I invite you all to stay tuned on ccifc.org or on our WeChat account, where we will post more webinars information that we will have in the upcoming weeks. Anything you would like to add, Christine, while we wait for more questions?
No.
Thomas, do you have anything to add? I think right now we are out of questions.
No further comments.
Okay, well, thank you for following our webinar. If we don't have a further question, there will be the replay, as I mentioned, on CCIFC. Thank you all for watching and following us, and for the couple of questions. Thank you, Thomas, for your expertise, and thank you, Christine, for organizing our SME working group. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.